What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burnett. We have arrived at the biggest week of the college football regular season. It is rivalry week. There's plenty at stake. There's two really big games, few other kind of important games across the college football landscape that I want to go over. You probably know what those two big games are, but before I get into it, if you're going to enjoy this video and want to see more like it, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. The big one this week is, of course, number 1 Ohio State against number 15 Michigan. I'm going off the AP poll. I'm recording this on Tuesday before I travel back to my home state of Ohio on Wednesday. So trying to get this all done to you guys before I do that, before I travel, because I won't really have much time once it's Thanksgiving. So number 1 Ohio State 11-0, number 15 Michigan 9-2. This is a huge game for the Wolverines for the fact that if they win, they stay in college football playoff contention. If they lose, they're out. And obviously for the Buckeyes, they win, they beat their rivals, snap a 4-game losing streak, and go to the Big Ten championship game. So big stakes, I think, for either team. This isn't the sort of game where you can kind of get caught looking ahead to future games or anything like that, which is maybe what happened to Ohio State last year, and the simple fact that they got in their heads and were outcoached and outplayed by Michigan last year. But this year, there are kind of a couple of key areas that I really want to key in on. The number one thing is Michigan's run game without Justice Haynes, and we'll see what the status is of Jordan Marshall against the Ohio State defense, obviously led by Sonny Styles, Caden Curry, Arvell Reese, and Caleb Downs, among others. The Buckeyes defense ranks number 1 kind of across the board in a lot of key metrics, or at least in the top 5 in those key defensive categories. So this is going to be a big matchup for Michigan. Really, they haven't faced a test like this defensively, I think, probably since that Oklahoma game. On the flip side, though, this is an Ohio State team that probably faces their toughest test on offense since that game against Texas. How Ohio State's passing game does is going to be really important. You know, Julian's saying this is going to be the most important game he's played since that game against Texas in the season opener, and we'll see what the injury outlook is for Jeremiah Smith and for Carnell Tate. Smith has said that he's going to suit up, that he's going to be ready to play. We'll see how things look for Carnell Tate. Obviously, the Wolverines' defensive end, Derek Moore, I think has 9.5 sacks this season, so he's going to be somebody who can create some havoc potentially. You've got Ernest Hausman in the middle, and then Zeke Berry, Jair Hill in that back half in the secondary. So definitely a huge matchup there. Michigan hasn't been as shut you down, lock you down, but their defense, especially passing defense and rush defense, is still really good. Finally, I think this is also a case of a psychological factor. The obvious thing is that Michigan's won 4 straight against the Buckeyes, and they did it the last 2 times in Columbus, including last year when really they had nothing to play for in that game except for rivalry pride. You know, they were sitting at 6 and 5 going into that one. They got a big win, and then they go on and beat Alabama as well to finish 8 and 5 on the season. So this year, there's a little bit more at stake, I think, for the Wolverines, but they still kind of are going in there, I think, with nothing to lose. It's going to be a raucous environment in Ann Arbor because it is, for Michigan at least, kind of a college football playoff play-in game. Again, Ohio State, in terms of the college football playoff picture, could afford to lose, but I don't think this is a game that any Buckeye fans or players or anybody is overlooking in the slightest. This is a game that Ohio State really needs to win this year. And then again, for both of these teams, in terms of what they're going up against defensively, their toughest test since a couple early season games against Texas and against Oklahoma. Each of the last 4 years, I've talked myself into picking the Buckeyes to win this game. I think probably, last year that was what should have been a pretty easy pick. Wolverines pulled probably one of the biggest upsets in the history of the game. 2023, that one was a little bit more of a toss-up. The game proved to be that way. That was maybe one that I probably should have gone with the other team. But then, the other 2 years, 2021 is when it shifted, and 22, it kind of looked like, okay, they won last year at home, but we're going to turn around and win in Columbus. So I am going to go with the Buckeyes again. I do think this year the defense does what they did last year. I mean, they shut down Michigan. Michigan's offense is better this year. Bryce Underwood is finding his groove. but I think the Ohio State defense, somebody like a Caden Curry makes a big play late, or Caleb Downs maybe gets an interception or a big hit late in the game. I just think the defensive players for Ohio State make the big plays late, and I also think Ohio State doesn't try to beat Michigan at their own game. I think they try to beat Michigan at what works best for Ohio State. That's probably going to be passing the ball quite a bit more. So I'm going with Ohio State 27, Michigan 24. Another key game, non-conference game, kind of actually very similar here. You've got number 4 Georgia on a neutral site against number 23 Georgia Tech. The Bulldogs are 10-1. The Yellow Jackets are 9-2. Georgia's pretty much locked in to the playoff. I mean, they would have to lose this game, end up going to the SEC championship game and lose there. I don't see that being likely. This is obviously, for the Yellow Jackets, probably, I don't know, it doesn't matter in the same way that it does for Michigan, because for the Yellow Jackets, because of the way that they've finished the seasons up to this point, they're going to need to win the ACC championship game to get into the playoff, I think, even if they were to win this one. There'd be some debate if they get a lot of help in front of them, if they win this and still either don't go to or if they don't go to the ACC championship game. It's a rematch of an 8-overtime classic last year. The Bulldogs have been rolling since that close call against Florida, that 24-20 win, while the Yellow Jackets have lost 2 out of 3. I think this is probably a fairly comfortable win for the Bulldogs. It might on the scoreboard be a little bit close, but I think this kind of gets back to how it had been for Georgia, pretty much dominating this rivalry in recent years. And I think it's Georgia 31, Georgia Tech 21. Next up, this one is also, again, kind of similar to Ohio State, Michigan. You've got number 3, Texas A&M, at number 16, Texas. It's actually even more similar than the previous one I mentioned, because you have the higher-ranked team, the team that is basically all but locked in to making the conference championship game, against a team that is holding on to a last gasp college football playoff hopes, and that's where the Longhorns are. They're 8-3. They have struggled at times in big games. Obviously they really kind of fell apart against Georgia a couple weeks ago when they lost. The Aggies, meanwhile, have found a way to win. Offensively, Marcel Reed, Ruben Owens has really stepped up at running back. KC Concepcion and Mario Craver are the 2 receivers who have made a lot of big plays. Their tight end, Borkature, has made some big plays as well. So look out for this Texas A&M offense. And Texas's defense is 5th worst in the SEC against the pass. They are 3rd best against the run. So if I'm Texas A&M, I'm trying to pass the ball as much as I can and try to exploit what is kind of a little bit of a weakness for what's overall a pretty strong Texas defense. And Texas A&M has the number 3 scoring offense in the SEC. So I think they're kind of able to just outscore Texas in this one. I'm going with Texas A&M 30, Texas 27. Next up, going out west to an old Pac-12 game now being played in the Big 12. It's Arizona at Arizona State. Both of these teams are 8-3. There's not a whole lot at stake besides the rivalry for Arizona, but for the Sun Devils, they can make the Big 12 championship game if they win over Arizona and BYU loses to Central Florida and Utah loses to Kansas, or if they win, Texas Tech loses at West Virginia, BYU loses, and Utah wins, or if they win, Texas Tech and Utah lose, and BYU wins. The thing is, Arizona State is the one team in the Big 12 to beat Texas Tech this year, so if it comes down to a tiebreaker between those 2 teams, the edge would go to the Sun Devils. So they have an outside chance. I think here, and maybe the odds makers, the books are seeing this because it's Wildcats minus 1.5. The Arizona defense is number 7 against the pass. So even if, Jordan Tyson, who's kind of dealt with injuries really since last year off and on, I still think this Arizona defense is going to be able to do enough to maybe get some stops. So I'm going to go with a bit of a road upset here, although, again, the spread indicates that Arizona is favored in this game. I'm going to go with Arizona 23, Arizona State 21. Finally, a big game in the crazy ACC. You've got number 13 Miami, who's 9-2, and number 24 Pitt, who's 8-3. It's a matchup of Carson Beck against Mason Heinschel at quarterback. Pitt has the number 18 passing offense, number 12 scoring offense, and they also have the number 9 rushing defense. Miami, meanwhile, is top 10 in both rushing and scoring offense. number 12 in total offense, are both top 25 third down defenses. Miami ranks number 6. And then also another big advantage for the Hurricanes here when you look at their offense in the red zone compared to Pitt's defense in the red zone. Miami is number 9 in the country in red zone scoring percentage, and then Pitt is number 95 in red zone defense. So that favors Miami. I think this could be a really good game. I know Miami has dropped a lot of these big games, and it might not matter if all the other teams in front of them keep winning, but I do think the Hurricanes get a win here and open them the chance that they can either A, get into the ACC championship game, and I'll go over here in a second kind of what the outlook is for that, because there's a lot of teams that are still alive to make the conference championship game heading into the final week. And I also think Miami gives themselves a chance to maybe, if a team ahead of them, like a BYU even, like an Oklahoma against LSU, any of those teams lose, Miami could have a chance to jump up. So now quickly going over those kind of ACC scenarios, I'll pop up the ones that are a bit more complicated here on screen. I'm not going to go over them fully in depth. But the simplest is for Virginia and SMU. Both of those teams are win and in. Even if Pitt wins, who is tied with both of those two teams, the Panthers would still need either Virginia or SMU to lose. So in the win and in category is Virginia and SMU. In the win and one other result category is Pitt. And then there's 3 more teams who are win and you need a lot of help. You've got the Duke Blue Devils, who have not had a very good regular season, but are still in the fight for an ACC conference championship bid. You've got Georgia Tech, who has really sputtered and faltered down the stretch, but they still have a shot. And then you've also got Miami. The Hurricanes, again, have that chance here to even potentially, if they don't make the ACC championship game, to bump up into the top 10, which is probably what they'll need. Because they might not be a conference champion and get that auto bid. There's a possibility, in fact, that Miami even wins, and then either Virginia or SMU, who are both ranked lower than them or not ranked at all. I think SMU is maybe back in the rankings this week, at least the AP poll. But they could get their bid stolen by the team that wins the conference, even though they finish ranked ahead of them. So that's kind of a unique twist, I guess, to this scenario. And again, I have those popped up here on screen, kind of what each of those 3 teams need, but that's the outlook here. Finally, looking over a couple of other interesting games in the Big Ten and the SEC, you got number 7 Oregon, 10-1 at Washington, who's 8-3. For the Ducks, it's all about finishing the job and limiting DeMond Williams on offense. For the Huskies, to pull the upset here, they're going to need to get explosive plays and also, I think, create havoc like Indiana was able to do defensively when they beat Oregon. I think, though, Oregon's just a little bit too much here. I think Washington maybe puts up a fight for a little bit of this game, but I think Oregon wins by double digits. I'm going Oregon 31, Washington 21. Finally, LSU at Oklahoma, number 8 Sooners are hosting the Tigers. This would have looked like a bigger game going into the season, and it would have looked like maybe, LSU would be in the opposite position just because of Oklahoma's schedule, but I think the Sooners are playing much better football. They've got the better defense here. Their offense is also doing just enough. They kind of won ugly last week. This one might not be too pretty either, but I think the Sooners get a win, punch their ticket to the college football playoff, and get the win 27-17. Finally, one of those teams that's in a similar boat to Miami is Vanderbilt, who's number 12 in the AP poll. They're at number 18, Tennessee. Commodores are 9-2. Volunteers are 8-3. I think if this game is in Nashville, and I don't want to make a prediction just because of where the location is, but I really do believe if this one's in Nashville, I think I give the Commodores a little bit of a fighting chance. But I think Neyland Stadium, even though the Volunteers are likely out of any chance at making the college football playoff, a win here would mean they'd at least be in that discussion. So while it's a very outside chance, I think the fact that they still kind of have something to play for, that those fans are always getting rowdy there on Old Rocky Top, I'm going to go with Tennessee 31, Vanderbilt 27. Finally, quickly breezing through the FCS playoffs, just kind of giving my predictions. I've got Youngstown State over Yale. I've got Harvard over Villanova. I've got Rhode Island over Central Connecticut State. I've got Abilene Christian over Lamar. Lamar has kind of struggled down the back stretch of the season, which is something I kind of noticed when looking over both of those two teams. Illinois State over Southeast Louisiana. I think they get a good road win. I think they've kind of been hardened up by that tough conference that they play in. Teams like North Dakota State, South Dakota State, North Dakota, South Dakota, all those teams are in the playoffs. So I think Illinois State gets the win there. North Dakota at Tennessee Tech. Now, on the flip side here, I think Tennessee Tech has had a really good season. They've got a good offense and a pretty solid defense as well. So I've got Tennessee Tech moving on. I've got South Dakota State over New Hampshire. We'll see what the quarterback situation looks like. They've been dealing with injuries pretty much all season. And then I've got South Dakota over Drake. But that is my full rundown of Week 14, all the way from the game, the biggest rivalry in college football, all the way to the FCS playoffs. That's kind of my rundown. Let me know in the comments below your predictions for Rivalry Week. And have a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy time with your family and eating good food and watching plenty of good football. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk. Happy Thanksgiving. I'm Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.